Hi guys, we're back talking about Christian nationalism again and how it impacts authoritarianism and stuff like that. And the one thing I really wanted to talk about was the documentary I'd mentioned in my last video, Apocalypse in the Tropics. I have been thinking about this documentary ever since I watched it, and I rewatched it recently so that way I could break down everything, we could talk about it, because it's actually pretty insane how the exact stuff happening there has happened here and vice versa. It just really showcases how people use Christian nationalism as a very strong tool to gain authoritarian power. We can see this in events that are so identical to each other. I want to start off by talking about evangelicalism entering Brazil. Protestantism started in Brazil in the 19th century and grew in the 20th century. Evangelical and Pentecostal are the most represented forms of Protestantism in Brazil. It's the second largest Protestant population when it comes to Western countries. In the mid-19th century, U.S. Protestant missionaries, mostly Presbyterian, Baptist, and Methodist, began evangelizing in Brazil. These missionaries emphasized evangelical theology, biblical authority, and this idea of being born again. Personal conviction. They introduced revivalist styles of preaching, which means there was a lot of emotion, passion involved. It was more about persuasive appeals rather than theological lectures. It was meant to really touch people's emotions, and I know a lot of you already know this, but one way they do that is music. Music is central to this, so that's what they were bringing to Brazil. We see Billy Graham go to Brazil in 1947 and speak about political issues in Brazil, and this includes the threat of communism. During this time, he went to 180 different countries, talking to them about the dangers of communism. He even called communism Satan's religion. This was his communism crusades type deal he went around all these countries doing. I didn't even know Billy Graham did this, actually. Not that I know a ton about Billy Graham, but yeah, he really hated communism, and I know a lot of people did during that time period. I just wasn't sure of the connection between that and Billy Graham. But that's pretty wild. Here's a clip of him in Brazil.
God looks upon you as an individual.
Deus está olhando para nós, cada individualmente.
And you stand before God today as just one person before him.
E você agora está diante de Deus como uma pessoa diante dele.
And he calls upon you to repent.
E ele está chamando a você pessoalmente ao arrependimento.
He commands you to repent.
Ele está ordenando que você se arrependa.
Have you repented?
Você já se arrependeu?
Will you make that decision today?
Você fará esta decisão hoje?
If you will, I want you to take your program and wave it.
Se você está pronto a fazer isso, eu peço que peguem o programa e agora fiquem abanando o programa.
Right now, just wave it.
Onde estão? Podem ir agora mesmo.
And say today, I want Jesus in my heart.
E digam hoje, eu quero Jesus no meu coração.
I want my sin forgiven.
Eu quero os meus pecados perdoados.
I want to know I'm going to heaven.
Eu quero saber que vou para o céu.
Just wave your program.
Onde estão? Podem simplesmente abanar o seu programa.
In my last video, I talked a lot about how religion and politics started mixing a lot with the rise of the moral majority, which was founded by Jerry Falwell. If you want to know more about that, check out my last video. I think it's super interesting. But yeah, we see this come up in 1971, and we know that their core themes were opposition to abortion and LGBTQ rights, defense of family values, and linking Christianity with patriotism and nationalism. So these ideas were not just kept in the United States, they were brought to Brazil. They did this through evangelical churches, the revivalist worship we talked about, cultural politics. Evangelicalism built a powerful media presence in Brazil through TV stations, radio, mega church networks. Pastors really started urging people in Brazil to vote biblically and framing the elections as a spiritual battle of good versus evil. The main person we're going to be talking about, who is very similar to Donald Trump, and the tactics that he uses are very similar to Donald Trump, is Jair Bolsonaro. He ran in the 2019 election in Brazil, so I'm going to kind of give you a little introduction into who he is and what his stances were. Bolsonaro was a self-proclaimed Catholic in 2016. He was baptized by an evangelical pastor in the Jordan River in Israel. Most people consider this purely a political stunt because he was Catholic, and even after the fact he identified as Catholic, so people were like, did you really mean that? Most people don't think so. They described him as an imperfect man that God was using. Does that sound familiar to you?
I can understand the evangelicals to a certain extent saying, well, maybe he's not as nice as we want him to be, but they also want to see the country be great.
Why do you think those voters are drawn to you?
Well, I'm Protestant, I'm Presbyterian, which means something. Maybe he's not as perfect on the Bible, but I did go to Sunday school for many years, I want to tell you.
He painted the left as evil, and his side was the side that was with God. They were on the side of the divine, as they do, as they say.
Greeted supporters and then gave a speech. Quote, "We have a battle ahead of us between good and evil. The battleground is clear, but as history has always shown, good will prevail." Quote.
Other things he said about the leftists: they supported satanic ideologies, they were coming after traditional values, they were trying to destroy the traditional values, they were an attack on families, they were all communists and socialists, and they were corrupt and criminals. They were morally wrong people, essentially. He regularly attacked them for promoting gender ideologies, which included feminism, LGBTQ rights, and progressive sex education. And he also referred to leftists as red outlaws, which I never heard that term before, but that's what he called them. So now we're going to jump to 2017 when Bolsonaro was running against Luiz Lula. Lula was a left-wing candidate and the founder of the Workers' Party, and obviously Bolsonaro was the right-wing candidate. So charges were brought up against Lula regarding the accusation that Lula got a fancy apartment as part of a bribe in a corruption scheme, even though Lula didn't own the apartment or live in the apartment. Here's a clip from that.
You think he will be exonerated soon, and by which legal means?
I don't want a lighter sentence. I want my innocence. The correct word is innocence. Either these cowards who arrested me prove that I have committed a crime, because I've proven I did not commit one, and they free me and apologize to the Brazilian people, okay? Or they will have to find another solution. Because I want to leave here with my head held up high, just like I came in.
Later, this case was thrown out against Lula because he wasn't tried by the right court, and because a judge named Judge Morrow coached prosecutors on how to win against Lula. This means there was bias involved. Lula had a big lead on Bolsonaro, and because of this charge, Lula could no longer run due to the clean slate law, which stopped anyone with criminal conviction from running for office. So that took him out of the race completely. So Bolsonaro ended up winning the election in October 2018, and just weeks after he won, that Judge Morrow, who coached the prosecutors on how to win against Lula, he joined Bolsonaro as his justice minister. Side-eye. But once those messages from Judge Morrow came to light, Lula was released, and a lot of people were very happy about that. In the documentary, it says about half of the people were really angry that they didn't get a chance to elect Lula because they really wanted to during that election. Others thought he deserved the prison time, even though the case was thrown out against him. After he was released, there were a lot of people eager to support him in the next election because they remembered what he did at previous elections. Lula was very known for the fact that he brought a lot of people out of poverty. Apparently, an estimated 36 million Brazilians were lifted out of poverty because of implemented social programs that he put in place, which that is impressive as hell. I was actually really shocked by that. I was like, damn, that is a good president. Like, lifting that many people out of poverty, that's pretty crazy. So since Lula was out of prison, a lot of support was already being seen for Lula and people excited to support him again. So Bolsonaro did what anyone would do and start kind of questioning the election before it even happened. Before the results even came in, he pretty much made it clear to the public he would be questioning the results if he didn't get elected. Does that sound familiar to you?
Your first term ended with a deadly riot at the Capitol, and you still have not publicly acknowledged the 2020 election results. Why should Americans put you back in the White House?
Because we did fantastically. We got 12 million more votes than we had in, as you know, in 2016. I actually say we did far better in that election. Got the most that anybody's ever gotten as a sitting president of the United States. I think that when you look at that result and when you look at what happened during that election, unless you're a very stupid person, you see what happens. A lot of the people in this audience, and maybe a couple that don't, but most people understand what happened. That was a rigged election, and it's a shame that we had to go through it. It's very bad for our country. All over the world, they looked at it, and they saw exactly what everyone else saw.
And of course, if he won, it would be true. It would be right. The election wouldn't have been rigged. But if Lula wins against him, then it's all rigged. Then you can't trust the system. Exactly like Donald Trump himself. And I also didn't know this before I looked it up. Apparently, Donald Trump had done this before with other things. He had a reputation of crying about foul play. For example, for the Emmys, he said they were all politics because his show, The Apprentice, didn't win. He called Obama winning the election a sham. Trump made it clear in general that the most recent election, if he lost, it was rigged, and if he won, it was going to be right. I mean, this past election, if he would have lost, he would have said it was rigged, like he did for the 2020 election. The goal is to create distrust with the voting system and democracy in general. That's what authoritarians try and do. This is something that Bolsonaro and Trump very much had in common. But because of this, because Bolsonaro was trying to get people to distrust their democracy and their voting system, a Supreme Court justice had Bolsonaro investigated for an illegal disinformation campaign because they felt like it was threatening to their democracy. Yeah, fair, because that is pretty much the point. It is strange to me watching people fight against someone like Lula and go for somebody like Bolsonaro, considering everything Lula did for the people. But I mean, I know that is the way it goes, but it is hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that he did so much for his people, and yet there are people who desperately wanted him in prison and desperately did not want him to be the president again. I think when it comes to Christian nationalists, though, lifting people out of poverty isn't the main goal, right? It's not about, helping the collective people. It's more about who's gonna put their deity at the top of everything, claim that they're the ultimate authority and that should be ingrained in the government. They want the government to uphold that Christian God as the ultimate authority. And Lula was a believer, but he very much believed in the separation of the government and religion. And he said as much, so he would tell them he was a man of faith, but he didn't believe in intertwining the two. And Christian nationalists obviously have a problem with that because they want Christianity to rule the country.
The presidential candidate Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva defended during a campaign event the need to separate the state from the various religious confessions. The leader of the coalition Together for Brazil stated during a meeting with evangelical followers in Rio de Janeiro that the state should not have a religion or a church, rather it should guarantee the functioning of religious freedom for all the churches that the people decide to create.
So during this election where Lula was released from prison, and it was after Bolsonaro had been president, and it was the next election cycle, there was a lot of narratives being spread about Lula and how he was going to attack Christians and shut down churches. If that sounds familiar to you. I'm not sure if it was a widespread thing, but I heard a decent amount of Christians basically say that Biden was going to come persecute them, even though that is a loud-ass car. Even though Biden himself does believe in God, but it's just a narrative to get people afraid and feed into the persecution complex that is Christianity. This is another tactic of Christian nationalists, where you should be afraid because one person is on the side of the devil, even if they say that they're not, even if they say they're a man of faith. It doesn't matter. They're out to get you. I'm the true man of God, and you should listen to me. You have to vote for the Christian nationalist president. He's the one who's going to protect you, right? Also, during this election, can you guess what was brought up? That's right, gender-neutral bathrooms. I was actually shocked by this. I didn't know that this was a thing in Brazil, but yeah, they very much brought up the culture war stuff against Lula because they knew that it instilled fear on people who wanted so-called traditional values. Christian nationalist leaders like to get people fired up over these culture wars and vote based off things like fear and anger instead of, I don't know, what would actually help the country. Same tactics, different authoritarian leader. Could be Trump, it could be Bolsonaro. They're using the same exact handbook. Because Bolsonaro was building up this narrative that the election might get stolen by Lula, he really had to build up that narrative so that way, you know, he could prepare people if he wasn't elected to have them go after officials and get them to change who was elected, just like Donald Trump did. Incite an insurrection is what he wanted to do. And he very much wanted like police and military on his side. There was actually a handful of police who did try to stop people from voting and supporting Lula as a part of the coup, and those police officers were later arrested. So of course, Lula did end up winning the election, and how do you think Bolsonaro responded to that? Not so good. Just like Trump, he called everyone to a speech, and he wanted people to hear what he had to say, and he started to incite an insurrection.
Hoje totaliza 69 dias de manifestação.
Por favor, para de ser aqueles bonequinhos que fica assim, ó, faz isso, faz aquilo. Faz o certo. Faz o bem.
I also thought to myself that Bolsonaro probably thought to himself, WWTD, what would Trump do during this time period? And he's like, I saw what he did, let's do the same thing. So obviously when Trump incited insurrection, he shouted conspiracy theories, disinformation, and that he really won and the election was rigged, blah, 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 blah. Bolsonaro did the same thing. Of course, he had to bring up God. It's a fight versus good and evil. It's a spiritual battle. It's not about who's president. It's, do you want God to win? This gets people very passionate and emotionally driven to go do something about it. And then he tells his supporters to go kick out the senator who was spreading disinformation and destroying democracy. In the documentary, while they're talking about the insurrection, the narrator brings up a great point about the Book of Revelation and how relevant that is to evangelicals and their philosophy on life, essentially. Revelation, it depicts violence as a necessary fight. When it comes to good versus evil, they believe this violence is justified. And I don't think people talk about this enough. Like, with evangelicalism, with fundamentalism, if you believe in the Book of Revelation in a literal way, like a lot of them do, you think violence and suffering and torture is necessary. It's not possible for it to end in unity and peace. It must end in violence. And I think that's something people forget, and that's why, you know, Christian nationalism can be so effective, because it reminds people of something they already think is prophecy, which is, this isn't about unity, this isn't about peace, this is about good winning. That's what matters the most. This is about a holy war, a spiritual war. You better fight like your life depends on it. The insurrection at our capital and the capital Brazil are so similar. The incorporation of doing this in the name of God, like we were just talking about. This image always sticks with me, with this man holding the Bible. Important to note that in 2022, 70% of evangelicals voted for Bolsonaro, and in 2020, about 77% of evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. Now, after all of this, Bolsonaro was banned from running for office in June of 2023 until 2030, I thought that was interesting that they give it a time limit, but this was for spreading misinformation involving voting and elections. In November 2024, he was found guilty of leading a criminal organization that planned a coup. They also said this plan included the assassination of Lula, the vice president and the Supreme Court justice, who was charging him with spreading misinformation. To my understanding, he is currently on house arrest, but he was charged with about 27 years of prison time.
In Brazil, former President Jair Bolsonaro has been sentenced to 27 years in jail for attempting a coup to remain in office. On Thursday, a majority of the Brazilian Supreme Court convicted him of plotting to claw back power after his defeat in elections in 2022. The far-right leader was found guilty by 4 members of a 5-judge panel. Bolsonaro did not attend the verdict hearings and says the trial was politically motivated. His lawyers say they plan to appeal the verdict.
Donald Trump, of course, had something to say about this because, of course, he loves Bolsonaro. Of course he does. They're like the same person. He said this was shocking and a terrible thing that Bolsonaro was charged. And then July of this year, 2025, Trump imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil. And one of the reasons he gave for putting this tariff on Brazil was that they were conducting a witch hunt. That sounds very familiar of how he talks about himself, right? He's always the victim. There's always a witch hunt going on. People are always out to get him. That's the exact way he paints Bolsonaro, and that's the way Bolsonaro paints himself and Trump as well.
In Brazil, Bolsonaro was just found guilty by the Supreme Court. You've been very clear that you would apply sanctions. Are you thinking further sanctions to Brazil because of this Bolsonaro?
Well, I watched that trial. I know him pretty well. Foreign leader. I thought he was a good president of Brazil. And it's very surprising that that could happen. That's very much like they tried to do with me, but they didn't get away with it at all. But I can only say this. I knew him as president of Brazil. He was a good man.
It is actually wild seeing them use the exact same handbook with evangelicalism specifically and how it all played out the same. That is just so... It's so wild to me that I guess when people are in it, they're not aware of it, or they don't care, or they truly believe in what they're fighting for. Like I said, with Christianity, when you convince people this is a spiritual battle, it becomes much more serious than them just winning an election. It becomes about them fighting against evil and evil people, which we know is extremely dehumanizing. And we're seeing that happen a lot in our government right now. At the Charlie Kirk Memorial, where we saw very disturbing speeches given by Stephen Miller and some others, and Donald Trump saying he hated his opponents and he didn't want the best for them, and then all of these Christians at this event cheering for that. That's disturbing, but that is part of this divine justice type rhetoric, and obviously it's very harmful. I'm glad to see that Brazil stopped this and actually made him pay for what he did. Obviously, I hope to see that here. I don't know, but so far, it's looking like it's going to get worse before it gets better. But yeah, I think this documentary is so important when seeing how these things play out and what exactly is involved, because it starts becoming a lot more clear how this is happening in real time. Because a lot of times, I'll sit here and think, how could this possibly happen? And I still do, but when you see exactly the tactics they use and how exactly they work on people, it becomes like a lot more clear how this became possible and how it's still possible right now. But yeah, I want to know what you guys think. If you've watched the documentary, how you feel about it, what you thought about it, and if it helped you in any way understand what's happening currently. I'm going to say what I said at the end of my other video. Don't lose hope. This isn't the end. I just think it's important to understand this from a bunch of different directions. Because, you know, the more you know. Now knowledge is power, and I truly believe that. So I hope you guys are holding up okay. I hope that you're doing okay, and I hope you guys are taking care of yourselves.